I probably shouldn't admit this, but we spent years kind of bouncing from provider to provider to figure out who would give us the most credits. We didn't have to pay for compute at all for years, but it does eventually run out. So our dream, right, our first dream was we want to ship sentiment analysis to people in a way that is radically accessible. We want to offer these ML models in a way that's as easy to consume as any regular function call. That was what our MVP was, right? It was this set of ML models, very different than what we do today. And honestly, I think that we're probably not ambitious enough with that initial MVP. My name is Slater Victoroff. I'm the founder and CTO of Indico.
This is Code Story, a podcast bringing you interviews with tech visionaries who share in the critical moments of what it takes to change an industry and build and lead a team that has your back. I'm your host, Noah Laphart, and today how Slater Victoroff created a tool to allow enterprises to embrace intelligent process automation. All this and more on Code Story. Slater Victoroff has had some pretty cool hobbies over his life. Though he claims to be a weird guy, he has a well-rounded set of activities. He's a vegan baker, which is half mad science, requiring the breakdown of recipes to the fundamentals of their elements. He's also a fiction writer, halfway through his second book, which he started during the pandemic. He had a short MMA career too, believe it or not, and has studied Yoshukai Karate for quite some time. Post-high school, he was burnt out on academics, so he jumped headfirst into martial arts, spent some time in Japan studying the craft, and did some MMA fights in LA. He has learned over the years that most tech people are typically afraid of being punched in the face. He and his co-founders fell in love with the technology centered around intelligent process automation, which enables organizations to automate processes involving structured, semi-structured, and unstructured document formats. Since 2014, they have been at the forefront of innovation in enterprise AI. This is the creation story of Indico.
So Indico at the 10,000 foot level is an intelligent process automation company. What that means for us is that we're taking some of the most complex ML on the planet, right? The kind of stuff that you hear coming out of OpenAI and Google. Not only do we have Indico alums at those organizations and sort of advisors, and we collaborate with them occasionally, but our goal really, rather than incrementally kind of moving forward the architectural state of the art, is really this idea of how do we take that technology and make it accessible specifically to non-technical users. And then in intelligent process automation, we do that primarily in the document domain, if you will. From an ML perspective, the thing that's cool about documents is that they are image data combined with text data. So we do image and text use cases as well, but documents primarily. We're a very classic dorm room startup. I would love to tell you that I was some brilliant engineer in undergrad, and I plotted out this 10-year plan of like IPA is going to become a thing, but it really wasn't that. Honestly, me and my co-founders, and that's Alec, Radford, Madison, and Diana, we kind of fell into it accidentally. Frankly, we fell in love with the technology, and then we became entranced with this idea of how do we actually make this accessible to people. Did not realize the path it was going to lead us on at the time, but very happy that it's ended up this way.
Tell me about that MVP. Tell me about that first product you built, how long it took you to build, and what sort of tools you used to bring it to life.
Back when we were getting started, so this was 2013, 2014, our goal was not making it accessible all the way to non-technical users. We were just trying to make it accessible to developers. So our dream, right, our first dream was we want to ship sentiment analysis to people in a way that is radically accessible, right? We want to offer these ML models in a way that's, as easy to consume as any regular function call. That was what our MVP was, right? It was this set of ML models, very different than what we do today. And honestly, I think that probably not ambitious enough with that initial MVP. But it was this set of function calls, right, with just a really slick, usable API. And that's really what we focused on is, it wasn't very scalable, it was running on the AWS kind of free tier. And ultimately, we figured out that product was not what the market wanted. But we were able to launch that and get some really nice user response and feedback that, this was a problem that was resonating with people, while we were still in school, right? So we had thousands of users. We launched it as a PIP package on GCP. We got $1,000 in credit for winning some hackathon on GCP, and then we used that to launch our MVP. I probably shouldn't admit this, but we spent years kind of bouncing from provider to provider to figure out who would give us the most credits. We didn't have to pay for compute at all for years, but it does eventually run out.
With any MVP, you have to make certain trade-offs and decisions about, what features you're going to cut, what, technical debt you're going to accept and pay off later. So tell me about some of those decisions and trade-offs that you had to make and how you coped with them.
It is really brutally difficult. And I think probably here, let's talk about, the Indico V2 MVP, just because the V1 MVP, we made those decisions, but we probably didn't do them the right way. So the V2 was kind of this, it was a labeling app, it was a discovery app, and it was explainability, right? So it was kind of those three modules come together, built for a non-technical user. And I'll say that the MVP never really stops, because there's the MVP of the product, but also every time we've got a new feature that we want to build out, our vision is always going to be bigger than what we can actually execute. And it turns out that, the number one thing that I really focus on now is how can we get the data model and the architecture figured out as early ahead of time as possible, and then set ourselves up so that we can iterate quickly on the product side after we've done that initial launch, right? You've got this massive vision in front of you, and I think one of the really, really difficult trade-offs is, general versus specific, right? Is how much am I going to build towards the platform that we want to go to eventually? How much am I going to just execute on the thing in front of me? And what we really have kind of decided is that the thing that you really need to get right is the abstraction you're using, right? Kind of the architecture and very much the developer experience for, the next engineer that comes here, think about what it's going to be like to develop on this. And if you've got those right, the rest doesn't matter as much because you've set yourself up to move really, really quickly after you've gotten whatever the initial thing out is. Because I don't know anything about the MVP that, other folks are going to build. The only thing that's true about every MVP is that it's not right. That's the only constant.
Getting the abstractions right, and that can be down to the domain level or a little bit higher. Getting the abstractions right so that it allows you to expand and move quicker later on is absolutely critical. Tell me a little bit about some of those abstractions, and without getting too detailed, obviously, but some of those that you worked through that were important.
One philosophy that has been helpful for us, and then I'll talk about something specific after that, is something that we call RDD, or README-driven development. And I'll say a huge source of inspiration, though I might be flashing a little bit, but for our kind of API design and how we think about it. So the request library in Python, I always thought was such a beautiful example of someone that took a problem that, the internet is complicated. Making connections and, getting request histories, it is fundamentally a complicated thing. And just made such a simple, usable interface for it. And he used this approach of README-driven development, and he's a real big advocate for it. And the idea is it's sort of exactly what it sounds like. You start by writing your README. You say, okay, what's the interface that I want to use to control whatever it is that I'm building? Once you build that interface, the idea is actually the rest will follow from that, right? And that however you achieve that interface, that's kind of up to you and actually matters a lot less going forward. And so that's something that's been really, really helpful to us, just because, again, I think people focus too much often on how to be clever in the data model, right? Or clever in the architecture. If you move some piece of your problem from, n squared to n log n, that can be really helpful, but maybe it's not a bottleneck at all. And working through your interface first and thinking, will often let you identify those bottlenecks even and help you figure out where you should be focusing your time. One piece for us, really specifically, just to give you a sense of kind of some of the really tough problems that we've got to deal with. Documents, right? So just think about, a page of a book, we'll say, because that's maybe a little bit more accessible to folks. And how do you represent a document? Because the thing is, there's 100 things I might want to do with a page of a book. I might want to pull all of the names off of that page. I might want to classify that page as to whether it's well written or badly written, right? I might want to extract all the paragraphs that have dialogue in them, right? To just sort of name a couple of things. Each one of those problems actually kind of the format that you'd want for a document, right? And the data format you can imagine is actually very, very complex. And the thing is, you might want to have your UI involve highlighting, which means that you have to work over characters. But fundamentally, the data that you're working with is image data. Those are really where we found some of the hardest abstraction problems, or where, it's sort of this multimodal data view. Depending on the use case you take through it, it feels like it takes really radically different paths. And I will say we've kind of messed up on that one a couple of times, and I think that we keep improving on it. But it's sort of like each improvement to the abstraction is like a major product revision for us. And in our 7 years, we've had 3 shots at it, is the way to think of it.
So you've got MVP 2 in a good stable place. You've got the abstractions where you're happy with them in the beginning. How did you progress the product from there? How did you mature it? And I'm curious about how you went about building your roadmap and deciding this is the next most important thing to build.
When we were a team of 4 or 5 engineers, this was a really down in the weeds kind of, we all get together on a table and we figure out, okay, what does the next week look like for us, right? In not an insane amount of detail, right? But figuring out, literally going to each person, like, what are your top 3 priorities? What are your top 3 priorities? Now, that's not a very scalable process. That's not really effective. And honestly, in those early days, it was less about a roadmap, right? Just because we had so much stuff that we so obviously had to get done. That's changed quite a lot for us, right? I think when we look at our product now, the size of our vision has only grown, right? So one of the things that we joke is, we've got 6 modules in the product right now. For any of one of those modules, you could get a couple of execs together and, we'd spit out literally a decade-long roadmap for that thing, right? Of what would be awesome and what we'd like. Now, obviously, that's super impractical. So the way things have really, really changed for us over the years is now the roadmap is not about what gets built. It's purely a prioritization exercise, right? And so we do a couple of different axes of this. We've got an annual planning cycle where we say, here's all the stuff that we want to get done in the year, but we're going into that knowing that it's maybe 50% right, and really just focusing on what is the first half of the year look like. We also have quarterly planning cycles, which is, again, what did we think we were going to try to get done this quarter? How are we stacking up against our yearly goals? And again, what are the difficult prioritization decisions that we've got to make for what makes it onto the roadmap? Actually, there's an analogy that one of our advisors used that I think is perfect, is that the best products are like spheres. You want the minimum surface area and the maximum volume, right? And the sphere kind of maximizes that. And I think it's a mistake that a lot of people make when they're designing their product roadmaps, is that they think much more about, like, I want to put all these flashy new features in, right? I want to let people do anything, like I want to kind of send it all out. And the problem when you've got all of that surface area, all of those different pieces that customers interact with, it really slows down the pace at which you can iterate. Because, the second, it's very easy to ship a feature, right? But then you have to maintain that for forever. And we talk about it like wake, like a boat wake, right? It's kind of the more surface area you've got in your app, right? It creates this massive wake. And a lot of companies, that can kill the company, right? Because that wake sort of grows unabated, and what ends up happening is that you've got a whole bunch of features in your product that seemed really interesting at first, and you've got one customer almost that uses each of them, and then you can't get after the features that you then really need to build without pissing off half your user base.
Well, let's switch to team. So tell me about how you built your team and what you looked for in those people to indicate that they were the winning horses to join you.
I love our team. I mean, if folks follow me on LinkedIn, they probably know this already, but I'm just, I post all the time. My team absolutely blows me away. When I was in school, I thought it was a very easy heuristic, right? Because I'm like, okay, I have all these people I've been with for years, so I'm just going to try to hire the smartest people that I know. And, if I ever met someone, I was like, wow, this person is just like so sharp. They really bring something to the table, right? I'm just going to try to hire them. So it was pretty simple. But again, that's like a couple of hires. That really, those were co-founders, right? And maybe kind of call it up to the first 10 employees. It was purely people that I had already worked with, and there were enough of them that I was able to get to join Indico, that it worked out. That's one really big plus. While there's a lot of minuses of starting a company in school, that's one really big plus, is that if you've got a bunch of friends that are graduating, are good, that's just an awesome way. It's a huge leg up on the rest of people founding companies. And then past that, when we talked about really structuring the technical interviews, there are a couple things that we wanted to check for from the very beginning. Number one is people who will overcomplicate problems, right? And that's actually one of our biggest sort of negatives that we watch out for. So one of our questions that we used to use was sort of this load balancing question, and we would set it up with kind of not even necessarily complicated words, right? But we'd use a lot of technical terms, and then we'd ask them a very, very simple question, right? And you could tell immediately there were people that, they would look a little weird, and they'd be like, oh, whatever, you just do it randomly, right? Or, round robin, it's like a hello world kind of answer. And we're like, yes, perfect. When there is the simple solution, identifying that and going for that, that's a huge, huge, huge advantage. It's something that's very hard for people to do. So that's one key piece. Another piece, and this might be unique to Indico because we are very much a deep tech company, but we don't have the luxury that, an e-commerce company may have where, that's a well-established problem and there are people that have been doing that for decades. So in our space, right, our space has arguably not existed for as long as we've been doing it, right? Because we are sort of we've been very, very early to this space, I'll say. And we hire people explicitly with the notion that we are going to be training them to get good at this particular kind of software, right, that we know they don't have experience with. And that's the other thing we look for is people. We don't want people, like, we know that you're not an expert in this, right? No one is an expert in this. We want people that are going to be really open about that, say, hey, I'm not an expert. Are you going to be willing to train me? Right. And obviously that is the goal. At the same time, obviously you have to bring a lot to the table. But I would say that one of the best interviews I ever had, because we also highly value transparency. That may be an Indico thing. But the candidate asked me, and this is the very first, after a 30, 45-minute phone call, right, was, do you really think I could be qualified enough to join your company? Right. And like a lot of people have that sentiment, I think, because, the stuff that we do is really, really complicated. But that level of transparency, that level of humility, and again, she was a very competent engineer, right, and incredibly motivated. And I just thought, I'm like, the fact that you are asking that question tells me that the answer is yes, absolutely. You will do an incredible job here. And she has done an incredible job here. I don't know. Those are a couple of the really, really key things. I would say that a lot of my general advice for folks is just remember that the person on the other side of the table is looking for someone to hire as badly as you're looking for a job. Probably they care more.
This episode is sponsored by Vanta. You're a startup founder. Finding product market fit is probably your number one priority. But to land bigger customers, you also need security compliance. And obtaining your SOC 2 or ISO 27001 certification can open those big doors. But they take time and energy pulling you away from building and shipping. And that's where Vanta comes in. Vanta is the all-in-one compliance solution helping startups like yours get audit ready and build a strong security foundation quickly and painlessly. How, you ask? Vanta automates the manual security tasks that slow you down, helping you streamline your audit. And the platform connects you with trusted vCISOs to build your program, auditors to get you through audits quickly, and a marketplace for essentials like pen testing. Join over 8,000 companies, including many Y Combinator and Techstars startups who trust Vanta. Simplify compliance and get $1,000 off at vanta.com/codestory. That's VANTA.com/codestory. This episode is sponsored by Kinsta. Between juggling client meetings, managing your website, and keeping up with everyday tasks, who has the time to stress out about website security? Well, with Kinsta, the technical stuff is taken care of, so you can focus on what you do best. Kinsta provides managed hosting for WordPress, offering lightning-fast load times, top-tier security, and unmatched human-only customer support. Whether you're a business owner, web developer, or running a digital agency, Kinsta makes managing your website easy and efficient. Kinsta provides enterprise-grade security, being one of the few hosting providers for WordPress with SOC 2 and other certifications, guaranteeing the highest level of security for your website. Thanks to their unlimited free expert-led migrations, Kinsta ensures a smooth transition for you from other hosting providers. Customers have reported 200% faster load times post-migration to their platform. What I find cool about Kinsta is their fast and reliable customer service and premium features that are included at no extra cost. Ready to experience Kinsta's hosting for yourself? Get your first month free when you sign up at kinsta.com today. That's KINSTA.com. Let's switch to scalability. So did you build this to scale efficiently from day one, or were you fighting this as you grew?
You know, it's a little of column A, a little bit of column B. I think that you do have to do things when you start that are not scalable, and that, just be strategic and intentional about where you're doing that. You do want to do things that don't scale, but you don't want to do them for everything all the time. And what we'll also often talk about when we're thinking about scale problems is what we call problems that we would be so lucky to have, right? So when we're going out and we're talking about scalability for let's just say you've got numbers of users on your website, and let's say each user pays you $5,000 a year, and your projections say that you need 1,000 users by the end of the year. If someone comes to you and they're like, hey, our platform, we are going to hit a wall at 10,000 users and everything is going to break. Obviously, that's bad. But let's say it's going to take 3 months to solve that. I'm like, okay, in our current projections, that's not going to happen for 3 years, and it only takes 3 months. It could still happen earlier, and it will still be painful, but that's something where we say, that's a problem we'd be so lucky to have. It doesn't mean it's not a problem. It doesn't mean it won't be a problem, but it means that if we are having that problem, the business is going to be in a good spot, and so we're going to have tools to navigate around it that we wouldn't have otherwise. So that's the one side. The other side, right, because I think that there are pieces where we have had to build to scale from day one to a really extensive level, right? I think a lot of that comes down to product weight, and I think where I see founders go wrong with this, the one thing that you do have to make sure scales is your product and your delivery model. And by that I mean not the product in terms of number of users, but I mean kind of product use case. Right? If you're having to build, new features for every customer, right? If you're doing a huge amount of custom work on top of your product and your product's not getting your customer where they need to be, that's the kind of thing that's actually really not scalable and is going to become insidious very, very quickly. So, from day one on the product, we had to be really, really focused on this idea that someone had to be able to pick this up and, build 1,000 models, over the course of a month or whatever, and do these things that people simply weren't doing today, because we knew that it was such a key part of the product, right? And it was, I think where people can go wrong is there's this belief that if you solve a bunch of specific problems, eventually the problem to the solution to the generic problem will appear. And it doesn't work like that. You have to build the general solution first, right? And then test your general solution by building something specific. And then, if the second one is easier than the first one and the third one is easier than the second one, then you're on the right path. And I think that so long as that works out, nothing else about the business really has to be scalable from day one, but that does.
Well, as you step out on the balcony and look across all you've built, what are you most proud of?
It is so awesome to wake up in the morning and know that I'm going to get to deal with some of the smartest people I have ever met, right? To know that we've got the kind of culture where, if I'm out in front of the, even the rest of the company, right, we're doing some presentation on something and I'm mistaken, right? they feel comfortable like calling me out and saying, hey, no, like you were wrong about that. And I learn every single day I'm with them. Recently one really big shift for me, right, is especially with the pandemic, there were a whole bunch of people that, I didn't meet them when they interviewed, right? For the longest time, as kind of the founder, I met every single person, I interviewed every single person, and I, was kind of a final say on whether or not we hired them. And now, obviously, as we scale, that's not true anymore. And the first couple of times I met people that I had never interviewed, I was super nervous, right? I'm like, oh my God, I'm not going to like this person. They're not going to be Indico. And it was the exact opposite. Right? I mean, I loved every single one of them. And what I would just say, and like give this advice to any founders is like, team is everything, right? Execution is everything, right? Your idea sucks. Like, I don't care what your idea is. It sucks. My idea sucked. Everyone's ideas suck. Execution is what matters, and people are what matters. And so long as you execute on that, so long as you get that done, everything else is going to work out, right? But if you mess those up, best idea in the world, best founder in the world, right? Best investors in the world, with bad team, it's not going to work.
Well, let's flip the script a little bit. Tell me about a mistake you made and how you and your team responded to it.
Oh, yeah. Oh, my goodness. I've made so many over the years. Look, I think the biggest mistake that I made in the early years, and honestly, this is probably one of the things that brought Indico closest to not existing anymore, was I trusted people's credentials over my own gut feeling and over my own expertise in the space. And I think especially with founders that are first-time founders and they don't have a mentor network, and especially if they are successful first-time founders, right? There are a lot of people out there that see that as kind of a prime opportunity, and you're going to have a lot of people coming to you with advice, a lot of people that want to be advisors or mentors. Some of them want your money, some of them want your equity, some of them are really just there to help, but you don't know who is who, you don't know which is which, and I took some advice from people that I shouldn't have, right? I mean, not exclusively, because I was getting advice from multiple places, and you have to do that to de-risk this kind of stuff. I think that the biggest issue is that when you're trying to build something new, there are a lot of people that don't understand what you're building and will try to tell you to build something else. And we had people doing that, and I listened to a couple of them. We wasted months and maybe even years, chasing down these specific kind of appified, killer app sort of consumery sort of things, and that was never the company that we were, right? That was never the company that we were going to be, and Indico was never successful until I told all of those people with their and again, some people with credentials are great. It's just that that's not what I look at anymore, right? So it was people with these incredible pedigrees that I just had to turn around and say, like, look, I don't care what your pedigree is, like, you don't know what's right for my business, and I'm not going to listen to you. And some of those conversations were really difficult. I had to kick some advisors out of the company. It was actually, I had a conversation with Mark Cuban that really shone a light on it for me. I had the kind of pleasure to meet him at South by Southwest. He's just one of those good folks that really, really cares about helping young entrepreneurs. So we had this conversation and we traded some messages afterwards. And I remember this, is I sent him an example of a proposal that we were sending to a customer. And he said, like, wow, this looks terrible. You absolutely need to change this. And I realized that it was the first concrete piece of feedback I had gotten on my company in months. And, I had to go through and I had to figure out, okay, who's adding value, who isn't, where did we make these mistakes? And, it was one of the reasons that eventually we did bring in the CEO, Tom. I was the CEO to that point. I shifted over to CTO. And again, all of those shifts that were things that I had felt from day one, that's actually what was holding Indico back, that I wasn't following my gut and I was listening too much to, frankly, if people knew how to build a company, they would build a company. Right? Like, more than they do. That's why you are where you are. And it's on you to figure out where their advice can be followed and where it can't. And just remember that in so many ways, you are the expert for your business. And don't forget that.
Well, tell me what the future looks like for your product and for your team.
So we've got a lot of really, really exciting things on our roadmap. Our massive vision for the future, right, is when you look at unstructured content and when you look at documents and when you look at ML in general, what Indico is fundamentally building is a better way for humans and ML to interact, right? It is a new kind of supervision. Sometimes we call it machine teaching instead of machine learning. It's this idea that, yes, we do have cutting edge technology, absolutely state of the art, right? But the goal is to make it accessible. And I think that not a lot of people are focused on that problem right now. And I think that when we look at the ripples of it, yes, intelligent process automation and intelligent automation broadly, that is an awesome place for us to be. And, we're doing really, really well in that market. But I think what people don't realize is that this unlocking of unstructured content is even bigger than just automation. Automation is kind of the tip of the spear here. And so going out to this notion of, unstructured analytics and unstructured applications, you think, as a programmer, if you've ever dealt with PDF documents, right, it's this massive nightmare. And Indico in a lot of ways is answering the question of, how do we make that accessible? How do we unlock that unstructured data and make it productive for people? And again, automation is the first part of that, but unstructured data is a much bigger problem than just automation.
We'll switch to you, Slater. Who influences the way that you work? Name a CEO, a CTO, architect, really any person. Name a person you look up to and why.
I'd say one person I really look up to is one of my co-founders, Madison, for sure. I don't know if that's a corny answer, but Madison's a really, really sharp guy, and he keeps me honest, and I keep him honest, and we butt heads, but it's a lot of fun, right? Maybe butt heads is even too severe, right? We've got strongly different opinions on certain pieces, and we've got different philosophies, and we just have a great relationship that really helps us turn that into really productive friction, and we get to a better solution because both of us are there. And he's just got a really, really incredible selfless demeanor to him, right? And I think that in so many ways, kind of the ideal of leadership is this servant leadership mentality. And, he's been an example for me over the years, right? And I'm very, very happy to say that, I follow in his footsteps. I mean, Diana also, like my other co-founder, I mean, she's incredible. I mean, you talk about the shift to remote and how difficult that is for companies. And she's our head of HR. And I credit her 100%. We more than doubled our headcount during the pandemics. Most of us have never met each other in person. And somehow our culture has gotten stronger over time. And I credit her with that, 100%. And it's something that I just would not know how to do that. It's incredibly impressive.
Well, we talked about mistakes, right? But a little bit different spin. If you could go back to the beginning, what would you do differently? Or where would you consider taking a different approach?
The most important thing is that reminder that the only thing stopping you from doing something is yourself. The most impactful moment for me as an early entrepreneur, I met Katie Ray, and she was the old head of Techstars Boston. She came to my school. I didn't exactly know who she was. I just knew that she was a bigwig. I tracked her down at lunch. It's probably a little aggressive, but she was very, very nice and patient. And I sat her down. I gave her this 10-minute rambling long pitch about some biomedical nonsense. And I remember she turns to me and she says, "Great idea. Why aren't you doing it?" And I didn't have an answer. And that was the question that ultimately led me to found Indico. And I think that again to kind of the earlier points, right? Embrace the power of yourself as an individual. The thing that got me into this space in the first place is the fact that you can pick up this 2-pound piece of metal and you can build an empire with nothing but your mind and your fingertips, right? And that's incredible. That's never been possible before in the history of humanity. And I think that it's easy to forget that you can build anything, right? It's all at your fingertips. And don't feel and realize that the only person that's holding you from doing something is you.
Well, last question, Slater. You're getting on a plane and you're sitting next to a young entrepreneur who's built the next big thing. They're jazzed about it. They can't wait to show it off to the world. They can't wait to show it off to you right there on the plane. What advice do you give that person, having gone down this road a bit?
I think what I would tell them is that it's really hard. And no one tells you just how hard it is. I think that, someone said recently, oh yeah, dropping out of college and founding a startup, right? That's the American dream. And it's like, I just had to laugh at that, right? Because it's not that he's wrong, right? I think people really, really do, they aggrandize it, right? They make it seem really, really glorious and glamorous. Like if you're here to make money, you're not going to succeed. It's really hard. Making a company is one of the hardest things you can possibly do. And one of the most important things, and one of the biggest things that differentiates people that are successful from people who aren't, is just their ability to pick themselves back up and try again. And I truly think that if anyone knew what they were getting themselves into the first time around, no one would become an entrepreneur. And every single founder I've talked to agrees with me on this, is that it is so much harder than anything you can imagine. And you can't imagine it, especially when things are going really well. But I don't care how good your business is, things aren't always going to be going really well. Yeah, and I guess just make sure you've got people there to help you when things are going sideways, because it's going to happen.
That's great advice. Well, Slater, thank you for being on the show today. Thank you for telling the creation story of Indico.
It was a total pleasure, Noah. Thanks for having me. It was a lot of fun.
And this concludes another chapter of Code Story. Code Story is hosted and produced by Noah Labhart. Be sure to subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or the podcasting app of your choice. Support the show on patreon.com/codestory for just $5 to $10 a month. And when you get a chance, leave us a review. Both things help us out tremendously. And thanks again for listening.
You just realized your business needed to hire someone yesterday. How can you find amazing candidates fast? Easy. Just use Indeed. Stop struggling to get your job post seen on other job sites. With Indeed sponsored jobs, your post jumps to the top of the page for your relevant candidates, so you can reach the people you want faster. According to Indeed data, sponsored jobs posted directly on Indeed have 45% more applications than non-sponsored jobs. Don't wait any longer. Speed up your hiring right now with Indeed. And listeners of this show will get a $75 sponsored job credit to get your jobs more visibility at Indeed.com/PODKATZ13. Just go to Indeed.com/PODKATZ13 right now and support our show by saying you heard about Indeed on this podcast. Terms and conditions apply. Hiring? Indeed is all you need.